So we'll start with our call to worship. Every being wishes to be happy. May we work together for the happiness of all. Compassion is the heart of spiritual practice. May our actions flow from the heart of compassion. Our first reading is from Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva, chapter 8, verses 90 to 95. Strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus be guardian of all as of yourself. The hand and the other limbs are many and distinct, but all are one, the body to be kept and guarded. Likewise, different beings in their joys and sorrows are, like me, all one in wanting happiness. This pain of mine does not afflict or cause discomfort to another's body, and yet this pain is hard for me to bear because I cling and take it for my own. In other beings' pain, I do not feel, and yet because I take them for myself, their suffering is mine and therefore hard to bear. And therefore I'll dispel the pain of others, for it is simply pain, just like my own. In others I will aid and benefit, for they are living beings like my body. Our next reading is also from Shantideva's The Way of the Bodhisattva, chapter 8, verses 129 to 131. All the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Is there need for lengthy explanation? Childish beings look out for themselves. Enlightened beings labor for the good of others. See the difference that divides them? If I do not interchange my happiness for others' pain, enlightenment will never be attained. And even in this worldly existence, joy will fly from me. We also have a short scripture reading from Philippians 2. Do nothing from selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility regard others as better than yourselves. Let each of you look not to your own interests, but to the interests of others.
Thanks for having me this morning. I appreciate you inviting me into your community and into this really sacred space. I could feel the vibes when I walked in today. It's a beautiful room, and you all have filled it with some incredible energy. So I selected those readings to frame up this message. And there's two really practical lessons I want to give today. In the Buddhist tradition that I come from, we talk a lot about on-the-cushion practice and off-the-cushion practice. And I think the metaphor is kind of like formal practice and applied practice. And we come to places like this a lot of times for formal practice. If you volunteer here or work here, you probably get a lot of applied practice too. Because working in a center like this, you know, there's upheavals and there's a lot of practice to work with your spiritual teachings. But where I'm at with my teaching, I really try to focus on the applied side of things. And I think there's a lot of overlap in our traditions. And so we start with this idea of everybody wanting to be happy. And that's the kind of thing that I think can fly past us sort of like a platitude. And so what I really want to encourage you to do with this idea of all beings want to be happy, nobody wants to suffer, is to really contemplate that. And when I say contemplate, I mean later. In the Buddhist tradition, we talk about the three stages of practice: listening, contemplation, and meditation. And I want to specifically talk right now just about listening and contemplation, because a lot of times we conflate those two. We see it in our conversations where we're planning what we're going to say next while someone else is talking. You know, we're pre-budding whatever they're saying in the moment. So contemplation is really a crucial step. Like that's where we connect with the applied practice. We take what we hear, we kind of try and listening to just let information come in, and then later on we examine it and we experiment with it. And so to me, that's like a great way to think about applied practice, examining what we've heard and experimenting with it in our life. And this idea of wanting to be happy, that's something that, again, like it can fly past us, but we've got to examine it in real life situations. And this is crucial, not just contemplation isn't just to like clear up space for listening, it's also because that's our reps, that's our spiritual exercise, you know? So keep that in mind with all the things we talk about today. So we have this first idea of beings want to be happy. We all share that. I think from the Buddhist perspective, that's the basis of our equality. Everybody wants to be happy. Nobody wants to suffer. That can manifest in all kinds of different ways and look all kinds of different ways. And sometimes someone wanting to be happy causes suffering for someone else. And we know from our own experience, we want to be happy, and we've caused a lot of suffering for other people and for ourselves. So we share this fundamental mistake, this really tragic mistake of all wanting to be happy, but again and again, choosing these methods that also cause suffering. That's another fundamental thing we all share in common. So examine, explore, experiment. And then the second idea, the second set of readings, both from the Way of the Bodhisattva and the Bible, got at this idea of valuing others above ourselves. That's high level stuff. Like I think about that almost as like spiritual fighting words. I mean, you hear something like that and like we want aspirationally to believe that. But when we get in high stakes situations, that's a really tough pill to swallow, you know? And so I want to highlight again here, contemplation. And that contemplation happens mostly in the low stakes situations. So we have to kind of wake up to this idea of all these moments, all of these low stakes, seemingly mundane moments where we can examine and experiment with these teachings. So for instance, traffic is a great place to do that. Traffic is a rich area for spiritual practice. That's the kind of place where people do things we don't understand, and we can connect with this idea of putting others' needs before our own, or that person, they want to be happy, regardless of what we think about what they're doing. So we got to really connect with these moments. And we have so many of them. There's so many more low-stakes moments than these high-stakes moments. It's unfortunate because so often we go running to our God or whatever, our prophet, in the moment where things have really gone bad and it's an awful high-stakes situation. But if we're not practicing these teachings in the low-stakes situations, it's so much harder in those high-stakes situations. So these ideas like put others' needs before yourself, they really matter, and we've got to cultivate these, but we got to start with the easy stuff, like exercise metaphor, pick the little dumbbells for this kind of stuff. So one method for applied practice is to examine and experiment with this idea of all beings wanting to be happy. The second one is, and I knew I wanted to share this when I was invited, this is a teaching that my teacher Khenpo Karthar Rinpoche gave me in a private interview, and it's really one of the most profound things I think I've ever heard, and I think it gets right at the key of all spiritual practice. And I want to share this teaching with you. And it's related to intention and conflict. And it came up for me in, I recognized the dynamic in my cloistered 3-year meditation retreat where you're locked in a house with 8 people you didn't pick for 3.5 years. And so you can imagine it can be a bit of a pressure cooker in there sometimes. And I noticed this dynamic around conflict where when someone assumed someone else meant to inconvenience them or injure them in some way, there's conflict. If the person just assumed that that was an accident, that person A didn't mean to harm person B, person B just thinks, oh, they didn't mean to do that, then there's a path for reconciliation, there's a path for harmony. But as soon as there's an assumption of somebody else's intentions being negative, we use that assumption to kind of as the foundation for all manner of ungodly behavior, all manner of un-Buddha-like behavior. Like, again, examine and experiment. Like when you start behaving in ways that you're not proud of later, it's often because you've justified based on an intention you think you've discerned in the other person. But I would argue we're also not very good at discerning intentions, right? I mean, I think more often than not, we're going to assume someone else has bad intentions and expect others to always assume we have good intentions. So our radar's a little off there, you know? So the question I asked Rinpoche, I noticed this dynamic, and I said, is there ever a time to assume bad intentions? Because it would seem like maybe we always have to assume good intentions, but something feels funny about that. We're like a little too intelligent for that. So I asked him, I said, is there ever a time to assume bad intentions? And he answered, first part of this, he said, it's best to think others have good intentions. If you can always do that, it's the best protection from giving rise to negative emotions. So the first thing I want to highlight is he said always. So my teacher said, that's what you do always. And he said that's the best protection from negative negative emotions. And if you think about, that's another one, examine and experiment, you know. There's a lot of things that can make us suffer, but it's the negative emotions. Like that's what impedes the happiness. If we all want to be happy, we have to watch out for those negative emotions. And we can protect ourselves by assuming best intentions. And he went on to say, if you always assume bad intentions, you are self-defeating. And this takes some thought too, because if we're always assuming bad intentions, we're in effect transforming our world. We're transforming our world into a world of bad intentions and people we need to protect ourselves from and protect our family from and protect our stuff from, you know. So none of this is an encouragement to become naive. We all know there's bad intentions out there. But when our knee-jerk habitual reaction is always to assume bad intentions, it's like we're adorning reality with negativity. And that colors all of our perceptions and all of our interactions within that reality. Examine and experiment with this. Rinpoche went on to say the second best approach, because he would often tell us the best approach, and then if you can't handle that, here's the second best. And I think I could also apply that to like a high-stakes situation, maybe tough to do that first option, but maybe you can do the second option. And he said the second best thing is to remain neutral. All is like the wind, the play of illusion. This is how you protect yourself. So we have this second option. It's a little poetic, you know, it's this idea of seeing every moment as a passing memory, recognizing that each moment is fleeting and causes and conditions come together and they fall apart. We don't have to see every interaction as solid and enduring. So that's the second option, if we're not assuming best intentions, we can at least try to stay neutral. And he said more, he said, this is how you protect yourself. He said, if no negative thought arises in your mind, that is how you protect yourself. And if you're counting, that is the third use of the word protect in this very concise teaching. Why is that? We make this mistake of thinking the protection comes from trying to figure out other people's intentions. We think we need to do that to protect ourselves. And we know what happens when we do that, especially when we bias towards assuming negative intentions. So he's correcting us here. He's saying that the best protection is to not let negative thoughts arise in your mind. If no negative thought arises, then we're really on the right path to happiness. That is your protection. That is your path to happiness and others' happiness. So it's really important to contemplate that approach. Examine it, experiment with it, play with it. I like to think of spiritual practice as almost like improv, right? Like you want to come up with all these little opportunities to try out new stuff. Experiment with different approaches. And so I think we owe it to ourselves in our spiritual development to ask, what kind of positive effect does it have on our world when we assume good intentions? So to continue with Rinpoche's teachings, he says, never respond to negative comments or actions. This adds fuel to the fire. And I take that as a reminder that we're going to be on the receiving end of people assuming our intentions. And I think everybody in here has been in situations where people, projected on you an intention you didn't have, and it hurts. It's tough. And so in those moments when negative energy is coming at us, Rinpoche said, not to respond to that. Don't add fuel to the fire. That's protection. And Rinpoche closed this short teaching by saying, it is all about love and compassion. And I think that is the key to all spiritual teachings. We have a real fixation on trying to figure stuff out, and figure other people out. But it's all about love and compassion. And that means letting go, and that means maybe picking up a little vulnerability and getting used to that. The way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhi is a Sanskrit word that means to awaken. And we talk about bodhicitta, the mind of awakening. In bodhicitta, there are teachers who use the analogy of that being almost like an open wound. It's like, it's a wound. If you're in a crowd, you have this urge to protect it, but a wound needs to breathe, and so we need to have this bit of vulnerability. Low stakes situations, great place to start, right? So, finally, having had a lot of conversations about this, I think this is spiritual fighting words too, right? This is a challenge. And as you contemplate this, you're going to have resistance to it, for sure. I still do. I still keep trying to find these loopholes, in this teaching. But I've been through this for years now, and I can tell you it's been very transformative for me, and there are no loopholes. But examine it. Check it out. So I want to, just in case, I want to give you 2 ways you may bump into some trouble with this. The first one is what's left if you're not trying to discern intentions. And it's actually pretty easy. Outcomes. When people have really good intentions for you, they can still do things that cause all kinds of suffering and chaos in your life. And when people have bad intentions for you, they may, in an unintended way, open all kinds of doors of opportunity. So in any case, you have to consider the outcomes with clarity. So it's not like you're left with nothing. There's still something to consider. And then the second thing is, and this one comes up a lot when we talk about major world leaders or people who cause suffering on a mass scale. I want to highlight the idea, and I think this is the radical teaching of Jesus and Buddha and many of our great spiritual leaders, that you can make decisive change in the world, that you can work hard and with gusto to clear away injustice and suffering with the heart of love and compassion. That anger, hatred, and division are not necessary to make change. And that is so hard to believe, I think, for us when we really get down to it. But it is all about love and compassion. So I genuinely believe this is a practical key to unlocking our common traditions. And again, I encourage you to examine and experiment with this. And I really appreciate you having me here today and giving me the time to share with you one of the most precious teachings I've received from my teacher. And I give it to you because I hope that it helps in the practice of the teachings of your spiritual teacher, who is also my teacher too. And finally, just remember to wake up to all those little moments where you can practice all those low stakes moments, especially if you want it to be there in the high stakes moments. And if I can ever be of help to your community again, let me know. Thank you so much.